Several attempts at satellite communications constellations have been tried before. None of these have reached the scale of first-tier terrestrial telecommunications companies. Several have failed. What are the prospects for Starlink and Kuiper, then? Unless you're a ship at sea or on an airplane, your satellite telecommunications provider is competing against terrestrial wireless communications. Terrestrial wireless connectivity is low cost to provide, and those costs are falling. If you live in a rural area and terrestrial wireless communications, commonly in the form of 5G fixed wireless, or FWA, is available, and it's going to be much less costly and somewhat more reliable than satellite communications. It's also going to have superior performance in terms of latency, even though low Earth orbit constellations have cut satellite latency down to where it's much less painful than it had been before. If you look at the marketing material for both Starlink and Kuiper, they appear to be going after rural customers in the US. This is curious because this is the part of the total available market, or TAM, that is disappearing for them fastest. It's a bit tricky to measure rural broadband demand. The rural population is roughly stagnant as urban populations continue to grow, and that's one factor limiting the TAM for satellite connectivity, at least in the US. Some portion of that population will never be reached by 5G FWA. That part of the population will need satellite connectivity. But how can we tell if that's a big or a small part of what could be the satellite connectivity TAM, or total available market? There's one number that gives a pretty good indication of how things are going. 5G FWA now accounts for 90% of new broadband connections. It's a reasonable surmise that most of these new connections are in places where a fiber or cable broadband connection isn't available. That makes things tough for satellite connectivity providers. The new low Earth orbit constellations are likely to take away business from older satellite connectivity. With their bandwidth limitations and their high latency, the market for this connectivity will grow as more ships and airplanes are sailing and flying, but finding land-based consumer and small business customers looks like a market window that is closing everywhere where 5G FWA is available. There are places that can't afford 5G connectivity, but they also can't afford satellite connectivity. Satellite connectivity will have some pricing power because its customer base will increasingly have no choice except for the limited number of satellite-based competitors. This will make satellite connectivity providers some multiple, maybe 2 or 3 times more valuable per subscriber than terrestrial providers. But is that enough? A Saudi wealth fund is the most recent equity investor in SpaceX, with that relatively small round valuing SpaceX at over $200 billion. Contrast that with ULA that is being sold at a price that may go for $5 billion or maybe a bit less. Just as with Tesla and robots or robotaxis or whatever is just over the horizon, a lot of SpaceX's valuation rests on the future prospects of Starlink. Is that valuation justified? If we're talking about Tesla, it's easy to find that the answer is no. Tesla's price-to-earnings ratio is 10 times that of Toyota's. That's just wild. How about SpaceX? If you think just half of SpaceX's valuation is attributable to Starlink, that would put Starlink solidly in the top 10 market caps of telecom providers. That's a little dubious too.